Have you ever walked away from an argument feeling drained, frustrated, or like you wasted your time? What if I told you that the real secret to winning an argument isn't about having the best comebacks or the loudest voice? It's about knowing when to say less. The Stoics mastered the art of restraint. They understood that true power lies not in endless debates, but in strategic silence. As Epictetus wisely said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." If someone refuses to listen, no amount of reasoning will change their mind. So why waste your breath? When you refuse to be baited into pointless arguments, you rob the other person of control. You shift the power dynamic without saying a word. The strongest move isn't proving you're right. It's proving you don't need to. The moment you detach, remain calm, and let the other person argue with themselves, you win. Not just the argument, but control over yourself. Silence, patience, and restraint will always be more powerful than loud words and emotional reactions. Before we dive into how you can master this strategy, I want to hear from you. Have you ever walked away from an argument and felt like you actually won? Or do you find it hard to resist the urge to respond? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Hit like if you're ready to embrace the power of silence. Subscribe for more timeless wisdom, and let's explore how to become truly unshakable. Let's begin. Number 1, stay calm while they lose control. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, winds howling, rain crashing down, yet you remain still, untouched, unshaken. Now apply that same stillness to an argument. Most people think winning an argument is about having the sharpest words, the strongest facts, or the loudest voice. But the truth is, victory isn't about what you say, it's about how you carry yourself. When emotions take over, logic fades. The moment someone starts arguing with feelings instead of reason, they've already lost ground. That's where your advantage begins. Your ability to stay calm exposes their lack of control. The louder they get, the more desperate they appear. The more frustrated they become, the less credible they seem. Their anger doesn't weaken you, it weakens them. And while they waste energy reacting, you observe, analyze, and wait. This is power. This is control. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You can't control how someone else behaves. You can't stop them from twisting your words, raising their voice, or trying to provoke you. But you can control how you respond. You can choose composure over chaos. You can let them unravel while you remain unmoved. And when you do, you don't just win the argument, you command respect. A friend of mine, John, once found himself in a heated workplace debate. His colleague was furious, interrupting, accusing, and trying to bait him into a reaction. But John, he didn't roll his eyes. He didn't scoff. He didn't rush to defend himself. He simply listened. Then when his colleague had exhausted himself, John responded calmly, precisely, without a hint of emotion. Everyone in the room instinctively sided with him. Not just because he had the stronger argument, though he did, but because he held himself with unwavering control while the other person looked irrational. That's the secret. The one who stays calm always holds the real power. Arguments aren't won by aggression. They're won by presence of mind. So the next time someone tries to drag you into their storm, don't fight it. Let them shout. Let them fume. Let them expose their own weakness. while you stand untouchable. Number 2, ask sharp questions instead of defending yourself. Imagine a swordsman in battle. A reckless fighter swings wildly, wasting energy on brute force. But a master doesn't need to clash steel against steel. He sidesteps, redirects, and lets his opponent's own momentum work against them. In an argument, words are weapons, and the sharpest tool at your disposal isn't defense, it's precision. Most people, when challenged, immediately jump to defend themselves. They explain, justify, and try to prove their point. But the moment you start defending, you've already surrendered control. You're playing their game, reacting to their attacks instead of making them question their own stance. A wiser approach? Ask sharp, pointed questions. Instead of fighting their argument head-on, turn it back on them. A weak position cannot hold under its own weight. Let them struggle to support it. The more they attempt to explain, the more their argument unravels. And the best part? You barely have to say anything at all. The Stoics mastered this art of restraint and strategy. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." A composed, strategic thinker will always outmatch someone who argues emotionally. Instead of rushing into a back-and-forth battle, step back and shift the burden of proof onto them. If their reasoning is flawed, it will collapse under its own contradictions. Your job isn't to fight, it's to guide them to defeat themselves. Alex was in a debate with a coworker who dismissed his project idea as unrealistic. Instead of getting defensive, Alex simply asked, "What specifically makes you think it won't work?" His coworker hesitated, then mentioned a minor issue. Alex followed up with, "And how is that different from challenges we've successfully handled before?" His coworker fumbled, realizing he wasn't arguing from logic, just opposition. Within minutes, he was backtracking, and Alex had won without ever needing to prove himself. That's the power of asking the right questions. So how do you apply this? 1. Stay calm. The more composed you are, the more control you hold. 2. Ask precise, pointed questions. Make them explain themselves fully. You'll often find their argument is weaker than they realize. 3. Resist the urge to defend. Instead of justifying yourself, make them justify their position. At the end of the day, the person asking the questions controls the conversation. Arguments aren't won by shouting the loudest. They're won by making the other person realize their own mistakes. So let them talk, let them struggle, and let their own words work against them. Number 3, use silence to make them doubt themselves. Picture a battlefield where one warrior swings wildly, shouting and lunging, desperate to land a blow, while the other stands still, calm and unfazed. Which one truly holds the power? In arguments, words are weapons. But silence? Silence is the ultimate strategy. Most people believe that winning a debate means talking more, proving more, and responding to every point. But the truth is, sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. When used with intent, silence isn't weakness. It's a psychological weapon that forces the other person to wrestle with their own thoughts. Here's the reality. Silence creates discomfort. When someone argues, they expect resistance. They expect you to push back, to meet their energy with equal force. But when you don't, when you simply remain calm, still, and say nothing, it leaves them with nothing to fight against. And that's when doubt creeps in. Suddenly, they start questioning themselves. Did I say something wrong? Do they know something I don't? Did I just weaken my own argument? That uncertainty, that's where you win. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus once said, "Let silence be your goal, except when speaking is more valuable." Not every battle needs to be fought. Not every attack needs a response. Sometimes the most dominant move you can make is letting your silence speak for you. Because when you refuse to engage, you don't just avoid unnecessary conflict, you force the other person to confront their own insecurities, their own contradictions, their own weaknesses. Daniel was in a heated debate with a colleague who was determined to prove him wrong. The colleague kept throwing out arguments, talking over him, trying to provoke a reaction. But Daniel, he just listened. No interruptions, no counter-arguments, no frustration, just silence. And then something interesting happened. His colleague started repeating himself, filling in the gaps, justifying his own words, as if he needed Daniel's validation to believe what he was saying. The more he spoke, the more obvious it became that he wasn't as sure of himself as he wanted to appear. By the time Daniel finally spoke, his colleague had already weakened his own position. That's the power of silence. So how do you use this strategy effectively? 1. Resist the urge to respond immediately. When someone challenges you, pause. Let the silence settle. Let them feel it. 2. Use steady eye contact. A calm, composed look can make them feel even more uncertain. 3. Watch them break under their own words. The more silence you allow, the more they'll scramble to fill it, often exposing their own weaknesses in the process. At the end of the day, silence is power. It unsettles. It forces them to doubt themselves. And most importantly, it puts you in control without you ever having to say a word. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 4, agree with the truth, then redirect. Most people think winning an argument means countering every point the other person makes, but that only makes you seem defensive. A smarter approach is to acknowledge what's reasonable, then subtly steer the conversation in your favor. When you agree with part of their argument, it catches them off guard. They expect resistance, but instead you say, "That's a fair point," or "I see where you're coming from." Suddenly, the debate shifts from confrontation to conversation. Their defenses lower, making them more receptive to your perspective. Here's why this works. People argue because they want to be heard. When you validate even a small part of their argument, they feel acknowledged. Once they feel heard, they stop pushing as hard. That's when you step in and redirect the discussion toward your position. Since you didn't reject everything outright, they become more willing to listen. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." This means you don't have to prove yourself right at all costs. True strength isn't about rejecting every opposing view. It's about using agreement as a tool to lead the conversation where you want it to go. David, a marketing strategist, was discussing a campaign with a client who insisted that focusing solely on social media ads was the best approach. David, however, believed that combining both online and offline marketing would be more effective. Rather than immediately contradicting the client, he chose to acknowledge the validity of their point. "You're right that social media is a powerful tool, and I agree we should leverage it as much as possible," he said. That one sentence made the client feel heard and respected, lowering their resistance to further discussion. Once David established common ground, He smoothly introduced his perspective. At the same time, some of our audience may respond better to traditional methods. What if we integrate both strategies to maximize our reach? Instead of arguing, the client started seeing David as a strategic collaborator rather than an opponent. The conversation shifted from debate to problem solving, and by the end, the client was fully on board with a combined marketing strategy. This approach worked because acknowledging part of an opposing argument makes the other person feel validated, reducing their defensiveness. When people feel heard, they become more open to alternative perspectives, allowing the discussion to progress productively rather than turning into a conflict. So how do you apply this? 1. Find common ground. Even in difficult debates, there's usually some truth in what the other person is saying. 2. Acknowledge it out loud. When people feel validated, they lower their defenses. 3. Redirect the conversation. Steer it toward your perspective while keeping them engaged. At the end of the day, agreeing with the truth doesn't mean surrendering. It means strategically leading the discussion, and that's how you win without making it a fight. Number 5, let them talk themselves into a corner. Imagine a fighter who defeats his opponent without throwing a single punch, just by letting them exhaust themselves. The same strategy applies in arguments. The more you let someone talk, the more they expose their own contradictions. Most people feel the need to jump in, correct mistakes, and counter every point. But here's the truth. The more they speak, the more inconsistencies emerge. If you let them keep going, they will overextend, exaggerate, and eventually weaken their own position without you lifting a finger. People who argue emotionally or without solid reasoning often trap themselves. In their eagerness to prove a point, they throw out claims without fully thinking them through. The more they talk, the harder it becomes for them to stay consistent. Eventually, they contradict themselves or expose the weak foundation of their argument. That's when you step in, not to attack, but to calmly highlight the flaws they created. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, once said, "Better to trip with the feet than with the tongue." A person who speaks carelessly will inevitably stumble over their own words. Stay quiet, listen carefully, and let them walk straight into their own mistakes. Let me give you an example. A friend, Ryan, was debating a colleague who was convinced that Ryan's business idea wouldn't work. Instead of defending himself, Ryan simply asked, "Why do you think that? And can you explain more?" His colleague kept talking until he contradicted himself. Ryan then pointed it out. "So is the market too small, or is there too much competition? Because it can't be both." His colleague realized his mistake, and the debate was over. Next time, resist the urge to interrupt. Listen carefully, ask simple questions, and let contradictions reveal themselves. Sometimes the best way to win an argument is to say less, not more. Number 6, don't take the bait. Stay detached. Imagine a fisherman casting a hook, waiting for a fish to bite. The moment it does, the struggle begins. But what if the fish simply ignored the bait? No fight, no struggle, just calm indifference. In arguments, emotional traps work the same way. They only succeed if you react. Emotional arguments are designed to pull you in, provoke a reaction, make you lose control, and drag you into a battle on their terms. But here's the secret. If you refuse to engage, you strip them of their power. When you remain calm and detached, their frustration grows, and their attempts to provoke you become useless. The truth is, people who argue emotionally aren't looking for logic. They're looking for control. They want you to match their energy, to get angry, to lose your composure. But the moment you take the bait, you've already lost. Instead, if you remain still, unshaken, unbothered, you turn the trap against them. They become frustrated, expose their own irrationality, and ultimately defeat themselves. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." You don't win by lowering yourself to their level. You don't need to meet anger with anger or match their aggression. Instead, you win by rising above it, letting them waste their energy while you conserve yours. A friend of mine, let's call him David, once worked with a colleague who loved to provoke him. This colleague would raise his voice, throw sarcastic comments, and try to embarrass David in front of others. But David never reacted. He never raised his voice, never took the bait. Instead, he remained calm, responded with logic, and even smiled at the provocations. And you know what happened? The more David stayed detached, the angrier his colleague became, until he finally lost control and embarrassed himself. So how do you master this? First, recognize the bait. When someone pushes your buttons, pause and remind yourself that it's a trap. Second, stay calm and detached. Respond with logic, not emotion. Finally, let them exhaust themselves. The more they try and fail to manipulate you, the weaker they appear. At the end of the day, people who argue with emotion want to pull you into their storm, but you don't have to follow. Stay detached, stay calm, and let them drown in their own frustration. That's how you win, without even lifting a finger. Number 7, state your point. Briefly, then stop talking. Words are like arrows. The more precise they are, the harder they hit. Yet many people believe that to win an argument, they must explain endlessly, repeating their point over and over. But the truth is, the stronger your argument, the fewer words you need. Talking too much gives your opponent more opportunities to twist your words, poke holes in your logic, and derail the conversation. However, when you state your point clearly and then stop talking, you shift the burden onto them. They now have to formulate a counter-argument and struggle to refute you. Often they can't. Silence forces them to think, and that's where the power lies. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In other words, a strong argument speaks for itself. Confident people don't over-explain or beg for validation. They state the truth and let it stand. When you say less, your words carry more weight, and your silence becomes a tool that works in your favor. Daniel, a workplace efficiency expert, once proposed a new system to his boss. His boss resisted, listing several reasons why it wouldn't work. Instead of arguing, Daniel simply replied, "Let's run a 1-week trial. If it works, we keep it. If it doesn't, we go back. No risk." Then he stopped talking. The silence was uncomfortable. With no flaws to attack, the boss had no choice but to say, "Fine, let's try it." Daniel won, not by debating endlessly, but by stating his point and letting silence do the rest. The key to mastering this approach is to be clear and direct. Say what needs to be said without unnecessary words. Once you've made your point, stop talking and let your words settle. When you don't feel the need to over-explain, you project confidence, and confidence is difficult to argue against. At the end of the day, the person who speaks less often holds more power. While they scramble to counter you, you sit back, knowing your words were enough. Speak with confidence. Then let them struggle with the silence. That's how you win. Number 8, know when to walk away. Some battles aren't meant to be fought. Not everyone argues to seek truth. Some argue to feel superior, to waste your time, or to drag you into pointless debates. And when you engage with them, you're not winning. You're just giving them exactly what they want. Here's the truth. Sometimes the most powerful move is to leave them arguing with themselves. If someone refuses to listen, if they reject every perspective but their own, if they argue only to satisfy their ego, why waste your energy? The more you try to reason with them, the deeper you sink into their chaos. But when you walk away, you deny them the reaction they crave. And nothing frustrates a manipulative person more than being ignored. Epictetus once said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." If someone is convinced they have all the answers, no amount of logic will change their mind. So why waste your breath? A wise person doesn't chase arguments that lead nowhere. Instead, they choose peace over pointless conflict. Jake used to debate constantly with a coworker who always had to be right. No matter the topic, this person would argue endlessly, not to learn, but to dominate the conversation. One day, in the middle of yet another pointless back and forth, Jake realized something. This wasn't a discussion. It was a game. So he did something different. Instead of continuing, he simply said, "You might be right," and walked away. And just like that, the argument ended. No fight, no validation, just an empty space where conflict was supposed to be. His coworker was left speechless. Jake had won, not by proving himself, but by refusing to play the game. So how do you know when to walk away? First, ask yourself if the argument has a purpose. If they refuse to listen, there's no point in continuing. Second, consider their intentions. Are they seeking truth or just seeking control? And finally, remember that your peace is more valuable than their validation. You don't need to win every battle. Sometimes the real victory is choosing not to fight at all. At the end of the day, wise people don't argue to dominate, to prove others wrong, or to seek validation. They argue to understand, to refine their thinking, and, most importantly, to know when to walk away. Not every battle is worth fighting, and true strength lies in choosing which ones deserve your energy. When you stay calm while others lose control, when you refuse to be pulled into pointless debates, and when you master the power of saying less, you don't just win arguments, you win control over yourself. The person who remains composed while others unravel always holds the real power. Silence, patience, and strategic detachment will often defeat loud words and emotional reactions. So let them have the last word. Let them argue with themselves. Because in the end, the strongest move isn't proving you're right. It's proving you don't need to prove anything at all. That's what true confidence looks like. If this message resonated with you, hit like to support the channel, subscribe for more timeless wisdom, and comment "Silent Power" if you believe in the strength of restraint. And remember, mastering your emotions is the ultimate victory. The more you control yourself, the less anyone else can control you. Stay strong, stay mindful, and I'll see you in the next video, where we uncover even deeper strategies to help you become truly unshakable.